The restaurant showdown. Barron Trump's MAGA hat sparks controversy. Inside LA Terrace, an upscale restaurant known for its exclusivity and high-profile clientele, the lunch crowd was settling in. Then Barron Trump walked in. Standing tall now in his late teens, Barron had frequented this place before. But today, as he stepped through the glass doors, one detail stood out. A bright red MAGA hat perched comfortably on his head. At first, he didn't notice the reaction, but others did. A couple at the next table exchanged hushed whispers. A waiter near the bar gestured discreetly. Eyes turned toward him, curiosity shifting into tension. And then came the manager. Mid-40s, sharp suit, sharper demeanor. He walked with brisk authority, stopping right in front of Barron's table. "Excuse me, sir." His voice was just loud enough to catch attention. "We have a policy against political apparel. I'm going to have to ask you to remove the hat." Barron, mid-sip of his water, looked up, surprised but calm. He set his glass down, removed his earbuds, and met the manager's gaze without flinching. "I wasn't aware of any policy like that," he replied, his tone even. "It's in our code of conduct," the manager insisted, gesturing vaguely toward the entrance. "We strive to keep this a neutral space." Barron let out a slow breath. He wasn't here to fight. He didn't want a scene. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," he said, keeping his voice measured. "I just came for lunch." The manager's stance tightened. A decision had been made. "You need to take the hat off or I'll have to ask you to leave." A flicker of something crossed Barron's face. Not anger, not defiance, just disappointment. "If that's how you feel," he said simply, pushing back his chair. He grabbed his belongings, left a perfectly untouched glass of water on the table, and walked out without another word. Behind him, the restaurant remained still. The tension lingered like a thick cloud, but outside, Barron took a deep breath. He adjusted his hat, not out of defiance but out of principle, and walked away. Little did he know, the real story was only just beginning. Social media erupts in Barron Trump's unexpected response. The moment Barron Trump stepped out of LA Terrace, the story was already in motion. It started with a single photo, a blurry shot of him walking away, hat still on, the restaurant sign visible in the background. The caption read, "They kicked Barron Trump out for wearing a hat. Freedom of expression? Guess not at LA Terrace." Within minutes, the post spread like wildfire. The internet exploded. Some users sided with the restaurant, arguing that private businesses had the right to enforce their own dress codes. Others weren't buying it. "So much for neutrality. Kicking someone out isn't neutral. It's taking a side," one comment read. "Since when is a hat enough to deny someone service? What happened to free expression?" Another chimed in. Meanwhile, Barron wasn't fuming. He wasn't scrolling through the outrage. He wasn't drafting an angry post. Instead, he sat down and did something most people wouldn't expect. He thought, yes, he could have gone on the attack. He could have ranted about unfair treatment. He could have let his father's supporters turn this into a massive boycott campaign. But instead, he asked himself one question: how can I turn this into something positive? And then it hit him. A fundraiser. Not just any fundraiser, but one designed to promote unity, to encourage dialogue instead of division. Within hours, plans were in motion. He picked up his phone, making calls to local charities, community organizers, and event coordinators. He didn't want a rally. He didn't want a protest. He wanted a solution. By the next morning, the space right in front of LA Terrasse was already being transformed. Tables were set up, banners were hung, a stage stood at the center with one message in bold letters above it: "United we stand, building bridges, not walls." Food trucks rolled in, volunteers arrived, local organizations joined the cause, supporting underprivileged communities, youth mentorship, and open discussion forums. And as the setup continued, the internet took notice again. The same people who had been arguing in comment sections now saw something different happening. Barron wasn't just responding, he was leading. By midday, the fundraiser was taking shape. But inside LA Terrace, things weren't looking so good. A surprising twist: the restaurant manager's change of heart. Inside LA Terrace, the once bustling restaurant had taken on an eerily quiet atmosphere. The restaurant's social media pages were in chaos. Hundreds of comments poured in. Some defended the manager, arguing that private businesses had the right to enforce policies, but many, many more were furious. "You just lost a customer for life." At first, the manager had brushed it off. People forget. Social media moves fast. One outrage today, another distraction tomorrow. But this wasn't fading away. Instead, it was growing. And outside his restaurant, something he never expected was happening. Barron Trump hadn't just left quietly. He had come back with a purpose. Instead of turning the situation into a political war, instead of calling for boycotts, instead of feeding into the division, he had done something completely different. He had transformed the controversy into a movement for unity. From the large restaurant windows, the manager could see it all. A stage had been set up across the street with the words, "United we stand, building bridges, not walls." He looked out the window one last time. Barron was now on stage, speaking into the microphone. "Yesterday, I was asked to leave this restaurant because of a hat. And that's okay. I respect their policies, even if I don't agree with them. But what struck me wasn't just being turned away. It was the bigger picture. How quickly we divide ourselves. How easily we let our differences push us apart instead of bringing us together. That's why we're here today. Not to fight, not to argue, but to prove that unity is still possible. That we don't have to agree on everything to respect one another. That we can have different opinions and still find common ground." Applause erupted. The manager felt something shift inside him. A decision formed in his mind, before he even fully understood it. He stepped away from the bar. He adjusted his tie. And then, in a move that stunned even himself, he walked toward the door. The moment he stepped outside, the crowd noticed. A hush fell. People turned. Barron saw him approaching. And instead of looking away, instead of meeting him with resentment, he smiled. The manager hesitated just for a second, before stepping forward and offering his hand. "I'd like to talk," he said quietly. Barron nodded. "Of course." The crowd watched in silence as they stepped aside, away from the noise. For the first time in 24 hours, the manager felt like he could breathe. "I didn't handle yesterday well," the manager admitted. "I acted out of fear, not fairness." Barron nodded. "It takes courage to admit that." The manager exhaled. "Watching what you did here today, it's humbling. You could have turned this into a war against my business, but instead, you created something positive." Barron smiled. "The world doesn't need more division. It needs moments like this. Conversations, understanding, finding ways to meet in the middle." The manager nodded slowly, as if processing the truth in those words. And then, he made an offer. "If there's a way for me to contribute, if LA Terrace can support what you're doing here, I'd like to help." Barron considered it. Then he said something unexpected. "Maybe LA Terrace could host an event like this, one that brings people together instead of pushing them apart." For the first time that day, the manager genuinely smiled. "I think that's a great idea," he said. "Let's make it happen." They shook hands, this time with genuine warmth. The crowd erupted in applause. And just like that, a moment of division became a story of reconciliation.